I'm Mary Martha Henson, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Jackson County Economic Development Foundation. And it sure is good to be back together in person and see a lot of familiar faces. So today's session is about competition and how Mississippi stays competitive, particularly in a post-COVID environment. In an environment where we're seeing companies make new location decisions and expansion decisions based on an available, skilled workforce or a pipeline of talent. In an environment where workforce has more latitude in where they reside, quality of place being a main topic. In an environment where small businesses are the backbones of our communities, providing employment opportunities, contributing to our tax base, and investing in our communities. In an environment where communities and economic developers are focused on building long-term sustainable ecosystems, and diversification of the economy is critical. How does Mississippi stay competitive? How does Mississippi stay competitive? Today's panel will focus on how Mississippi stays competitive in economic development, workforce development, and small business are interwoven to create Mississippi's economic growth. So today's panel, I'm going to allow each one of the panelists to introduce themselves. And we have one panelist joining us by Zoom. Welcome. And so I'll start here with John Rounsaville, and then I'll go to Ryan Miller, and then I'll turn it over to Janita Stewart. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Martha. I'm John Rounsaville. I'm the Executive Director for the Mississippi Development Authority. I've been with the agency, well, on an interim basis from last May through December, and then was made permanent by Governor Reeves in January.
I'm Ryan Miller. I am the Executive Director of the Office of Workforce Development, or as we have come to know this new office now, positioned as Accelerate Mississippi. This is a new office that was created last year, and I'm the first, hopefully the last director of that office, if I play my cards right. I spent over a decade in manufacturing-based education at the Center for Manufacturing Excellence at the University of Mississippi. I'm very excited about getting to work here and trying to be that coordinating office of Workforce Development Strategy for the entire state, and I'm glad to be here with you this morning.
And Janita, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Janita Stewart. I am the District Director for the U.S. Small Business Administration in Mississippi, and also the Acting Regional Administrator for the SBA Southeast Region, which incorporates 8 states and 9 districts, encompassing Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North and South Carolina, Kentucky, and Tennessee.
So John, I want to start with you, and I think the first thing we need to start with is give us some background on Mississippi Development Authority and how it plays into making sure that Mississippi stays competitive.
So at the Mississippi Development Authority, we are the state's lead economic and community development entity. Now, while we're the lead at the state level, that's just part of the story, because we are part of a network of economic development professionals across the state, and that's kind of a misnomer for people that aren't involved in economic development in an everyday basis. It's great to make an announcement of a new company coming to Mississippi. We all beat our chest and we cut the ribbons, but people don't understand a lot of times how much work goes on at the local level. So it's a mix. Sometimes companies or site consultants reach out directly to the state and provide us with opportunities to compete for various projects. And then oftentimes as well, these same consultants and companies may start at the local level. And then in the mix of all that, you've got lots of existing industry, not just the new stuff that we're trying to recruit from either across the country or even from around the world. You've got existing industry companies, businesses throughout the state working hand in hand with their local developers to do expansions. Last year was a phenomenal year for business expansion in Mississippi, and we often hear criticism from our existing business community. You know, you see these big announcements of a great new opportunity coming to the state, and our existing folks say, well, you know, what about me? We see all these tax incentives being offered. You know, that's competing with my labor force, and that's true. But you know, we have to take it from the standpoint of a rising tide floats all boats, and competition is good. But last year in the state, 80% of the projects we worked were existing industry that were doing expansions in Mississippi. And that's great news. We ended up with a phenomenal year despite COVID. A typical year for new capital investment in the state of Mississippi is just under, if you look at the last 10 years, just under $1 billion in new CapEx that the state is involved with. Last year we were just under $2 billion, so we doubled our activity, and 80% of that was coming from existing businesses. So that's a little overview of what we do for the state of Mississippi.
Thank you. So Ryan, you're the new guy, and you just heard John say that 80% of the growth in Mississippi in the last year was from existing industry. In workforce development, it's a Mississippi issue, it's a national issue. So help us understand, with your new position and your new role, what will you be doing to make sure that not only are we supporting our existing industry, which is critical because today we have to have that workforce available and ready, but also how are we going to create the pipeline of talent to attract new industry here?
That's a great question, and you're right. This is a national issue. Finding people who have a desire to grow and to prosper in new careers and linking them up to industries that can make that happen. You know, I was visiting the Mississippi Gulf Coast just yesterday. I'm originally from the coast, so that was kind of a homecoming for me. But one of the things that was so evident to me in my conversations with Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College and some of the area industry is that they're very honest, open, and candid with one another. When you see existing industry grow, it's usually because they're at the table with their economic developers, with their educators at the K through 12 system, at the community college level, and even at the four-year institution level, research institutions. They're at the table being honest and candid about what their needs are, but also what they're willing to do to help provide the solution to the issues that they're facing in workforce. So my view as to what our office is designed to do is to help being that coordinating entity that brings those groups to the table for that honest and open conversation. If we're going to solve workforce issues, we have to be very honest with ourselves about where we stand. And looking in the mirror is important to do that. And followed by that has to be really good, candid, honest communication. In those ecosystems throughout the state where I think that we've done well at growing existing industry, where companies are growing and thriving, I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I think what you're going to find is that more often than not, industry, businesses and companies like you are at the table, not just barking orders, not just saying, this is what we need, now go do it. They're telling you, here are our needs. Now, here's what we can offer to help meet those needs. Let's come up with a strategy that works together. So I think Accelerate Mississippi, working with MDA and other offices and agencies throughout the state, simply is trying to help set that table in a much more consistent fashion, to be that lens through which we focus that conversation and we focus those resources to be much more effective than we perhaps ever have been before. There's always room for growth. We're never done. There's always room for continuous improvement, and that's what we're going to focus on in our office. Thank
you, Ryan. So, Janita, small businesses, I mean, they really are the backbones of our community, and they provide jobs for a lot of our citizens. So tell us what's going on with the Small Business Administration, and give us an overview of some of the recent funds that the Small Business Administration has received from this administration.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that question. I did look at some statistics, and as of May the 31st, when the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, I'm sure everybody's familiar with that, officially ended, although really funding exhausted, just prior to that, I think about May 24th. is when the funds sort of ran out. There have been over 11.8 million loans that were made nationally for about $800 billion through about 5,500 bank and non-bank lending institutions that SBA partnered with. And of that, here in Mississippi, over 96,000 of those loans were made to, businesses and eligible nonprofits in our state for over $2.3 billion. Now, on the economic injury disaster side, which is the EIDL, that's the direct loan program from SBA, low interest rate, long term, which was up to $150,000. Nationally, there's been 3.78 million loans approved under EIDL for about $199.5 billion. And about 96% of that has been dispersed. And what we received here in Mississippi was over 32,000 of those loans for about $1.4 billion. And so this particular program remains ongoing through December 31st or until funds are exhausted. And I understand that there's right now plenty of money still left in the coffer in terms of the EIDL program. So there's something else along those lines called Targeted EIDL Advance. And so that's where if you did not get a grant last year, in 2020, after the EIDL program was rolled out because of COVID, because those funds ran out pretty quickly, it was $20 billion appropriated by Congress. The fund was infused with more money under the Economic Aid Act and again under the American Rescue Plan. So here in Mississippi, there's been over 1,000 advances, and these are the grants that people don't have to pay back that have been made to Mississippians for $8.5 million. So, all of these funds, of course, should be used and authorized for the intended purposes. And, along with that, to maintain staff, production levels for business operations to continue, which, could serve to really help, these businesses to become competitive at some point. So I can share more, but I don't know if you wanted to do a follow-up or just move on to the next question.
Let's move on to the next question. I have a few other questions for you later in the program about some of the other Small Business Administration programs that you've recently received. So I'll start with you, Ryan, on this question. In a post-COVID environment where remote working has become a necessity and the reliance on technology increased, what can communities do and businesses do to position themselves to be more competitive?
There's no question that COVID, as trying a time as it has been for all of us, some of the maybe advances that we've seen in how we work, how we communicate, how we stay connected to one another. I can tell you that my previous role, I taught a business law class. I had 150 students in my section. I have a sneaking suspicion it's because they figured out I was an easy A, but I'd like to think that I was just that good of a teacher. Everybody wanted to be in my section. But teaching 150 students via Zoom is not my preferred way of teaching, is not their preferred way of learning. So while it does provide us a better level of connectivity, there's got to be a balance between using that technology, advancing our business mission, increasing our productivity, but making sure that we're not losing the connectivity, the human connectivity between our employees. And so I do think that type of technology, whether it's Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or any platform like that, they have been incredible tools to help us through this. I think what you're going to find is that businesses are going to try to figure out how to balance that human connectivity with using the efficiency that some of those technologies, emerging technologies, have provided. And I think if you ask some educators, you're going to find that it's a double-edged sword as well. It is a great tool, but it is not the panacea of education. It cannot be. The CME program that I worked in, the best learning opportunities are the ones where students are shoulder to shoulder working, using their hands and solving problems together. That's how we learn best. That's my opinion, but I think, anecdotal as that may be, I think that's the right way in which we learn. I think it's also the right way in which we work. There are times that we're on the road and we have to make those conference calls, or we have to set up those FaceTime meetings, and those are great, and those are efficient. Those help us to continue to stay connected and communicate. But I think businesses have to strike that balance, because there's also, there probably are some studies that talk about as much as it helps with productivity, it might have a reverse effect that we don't want to have. And I think in Mississippi, as it relates to the fabric of our industries here, I think we're still a shoulder-to-shoulder kind of people.
Thank you. So John, let's turn this question to you. You see in Mississippi, there's actually a couple of communities that have gotten creative with the remote working piece. I think of Natchez and what they've done to encourage people to locate in a city where quality of place is of a priority. So from an MDA perspective, what do you suggest to communities to do to address the remote working functions that we're likely to see, and also the increased capabilities of technology?
Well, I think, first of all, it starts with leadership. You've got to have leadership at the local level, basically, to get anything done. And when we talk about, particularly in our rural areas with declining populations, more people moving into your urban environments, certainly technology plays a critical role in helping those communities to stay vibrant. I'm really excited about what Chandler Russ is doing with Natchez, with their incentive program to recruit remote workers to Natchez. And I think I was visiting with him last week when I was down in Natchez. They've approved, I think, just under 20 applications. So that's 20 new people moving into Natchez from other areas across the country, and they're literally coming from across the country because of this very small incentive that's being offered to work remotely in Natchez and buy a home. If you do those things, you qualify. I think that's going to be a great test model. Mississippians, particularly our officials at the local level, we're very conservative. But I think, and so we may not want to take a leap like this to try this big new innovative program, but certainly it's worked in places like Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now we got Natchez in the mix. And I think when we come, I told Chandler, at the end of this first year, let's get together and talk about what the outcomes were. And I think if y'all can prove it works for you, then I'd like to see communities across the state try to adopt the same thing, because they're really not losing anything. It's a net gain. At the same time, we've got to be more focused on technology to be able to make that work. We just finished updating our sites and buildings database at MDA, and that's the website that site consultants can use, our local developers can use, businesses can use to identify available greenfield sites, brownfield sites, existing buildings across the state that are available for moving into. And as part of that, it's a great new platform. It's got your full GIS layers. So you've got all your infrastructure information, wetlands information, even your fiber information. And just for fun, you can click and remove different assets on the state of Mississippi. And just for fun, I removed everything on the map I was looking at on my computer screen except for fiber. And we have, and at the same time, I can see the surrounding region, the southeast. We have an immense fiber network across the state of Mississippi, unlike anybody else around us. If you look at, so I can see all these, it looks like a spider web across the state of Mississippi, and I'm looking over at Alabama, and there's red blobs of fiber in Mobile and Montgomery and Birmingham and Huntsville and your population centers, but nobody around us has this immense fiber network. So we've got fiber everywhere, and it's available. The issue for us, of course, is connectivity. It can be in the ground, but are people, particularly in rural areas, willing to put that dollar down to get the service? So it's two issues when we talk about availability and accessibility to technology, and particularly fiber.
Thank you. Janita, on the remote working conversation and technology, talk to us about what the Small Business Administration is doing and the programs that you all offer.
So what I would say to that question is we have a wonderful network of resource partners that we fund. And the suggestion is that small businesses reach out to these resource partners first and foremost in terms of technology and those kinds of things. They can These organizations can assist them with a myriad of assistance in terms of development of business plans, sort of trying to pivot from pre-COVID or during COVID to post-COVID as it relates to developing strategic plans and those kinds of things. They can assist in terms of remote working, because I think some of that will probably still continue. So we have funded resource partners, including the Network of Small Business Development Centers. The state office of the SBDC is at the University of Mississippi, and within the network, there are several SBDC sub-centers located primarily at various colleges and universities, and they also have satellite locations or business assistance centers. And an additional resource is an organization called SCORE. That's the one that I say has a real call to duty, because these are volunteers, wonderful group of volunteer business counselors and business coaches. And they can assist businesses with, technology issues, counseling. They provide training, management, again, technical assistance. The Veterans Business Outreach Center that we have, or VBOC, which is established to assist veterans and families of veterans here in Mississippi, is headquartered at Mississippi State University, and their footprint covers Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. And we now have another asset in Mississippi, or we will soon, because we'll be getting 2 new women's business centers. So that's on the horizon, and that will be at 2 historically Black colleges and universities, Alcorn State University and Jackson State University. And so these organizations provide great service. And here's another great thing about that is it's of no cost for small businesses and entrepreneurs to access these services. Because it's already paid for by, we the taxpayers. So it's recommended that small businesses and entrepreneurs reach out to them for that type of guidance in getting, what I'm considering, getting the business back on track, post-COVID, because this is something that really can help propel them toward reaching or exceeding, going back to trying to be in competition with others, reaching or exceeding their competitors. So I did want to point that out about our resource partners, because they're critical to us.
Thank you. Let's move to the 2020 census. So the early release of the 2020 census shows interesting trends, including population shifts and an increase in the population who will soon age out of the workforce. This is a 3-question. So I'll start with the first one. How does this impact Mississippi? What opportunities do you see for Mississippi, and what are we doing as a state to prepare for those who will age out of the workforce soon, and make sure that we have a pipeline of workforce to support those jobs as the aging workforce begins to retire? I'll start with you, John.
Okay. What I'm going to start with, it kind of bleeds over into the prior question on technology when I talk more on the infrastructure side. When we talk about population loss, part of that discussion, of course, is keeping our young folks at home. We educate them at home. We face issues where we educate them at our universities or 2-year colleges, and then maybe they decide they want to go off and leave the state and go somewhere else and pursue a career elsewhere. Oftentimes because they don't think there's an opportunity here for them in Mississippi. So one part of that is we've got to do a better job of selling ourselves to those young people. Another piece is on the retention side, keeping what we've already got, which is really the same thing, but as related to technology, one thing I wanted to mention, economic developers, we like these big mega projects, and that's where a lot of the focus goes toward. Over the last 12 months, we've been working, we've got a team inside MDA that's working with the technology transfer offices associated with each of our major research institutions. So we're working with Mississippi State, University of Mississippi, Jackson State, Southern, and ERDC, the Engineering Research and Development Center in Vicksburg. And part of that effort is identifying what's being transferred, what's being spun out of these institutions. We've got little companies that we've got great young students, or maybe these are companies stemming from faculty at the universities. They're creating small businesses there in town, and a lot of that is very technology related. But we don't even know that those are out there because we're so focused on the big stuff. But we're trying to get real focused too on that small stuff. What are these little 2, 3, 4 person operations that had some great idea of perhaps affiliated with some research coming out of the university, and they built a company around that. So step one is, for us, is finding out what's out there. And I think that in building an index so that we know what those small companies are. And then being able to ask, well, how can we help y'all through your needs of needing to access funding capital or talent supply, things like that. But it starts with knowing that they're there and they're growing in Mississippi. And we've got dozens and dozens of companies just like that are spinning out of the research associated with our universities. But we've got to focus on those more. Glow, a little technology company started by some Mississippi State students. They had that. They've been in operation for 4 or 5 years now. They got ready to do an expansion, and Hagan Walker, the CEO, the founder of that firm, had that same question. Are we going to stay in Starkville or are we going to move to Birmingham? And they made the decision to stay in Starkville, and they've expanded downtown. So we work with them often and keep in constant communication. But that's a place where we can engage at the local level and help those little guys get started. And of course, that's talent that we were able to retain in the state, and we didn't lose to Nashville or Atlanta. So that's an example of something we're doing inside the agency right now to focus on technology clusters and talent retention. But it also helps us to sell. If we're selling to a large technology firm outside the state of Mississippi, and we talk about, we've got these technology clusters, we've got these technology hubs. Oh, really? We never knew that existed. Well, they do, and we're here to sell them. So we've got that capability in the state, and we can fill those needs. So it helps us to tell our story better as well.
So Ryan, let me turn this question to you about the aging workforce. I know in Jackson County, my real job is as an economic developer. And over the last 18 months in Jackson County, we've announced over 3,000 new jobs and $540 million of new capital investment. Today, I see Kerry Wilkinson, our president of Ingalls, in the audience, and Alan Summeth with Chevron, and I see Mary Graham with Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. And I say that because one of the things that we spend a lot of time as an economic developer and these 3,000 new jobs is, what are we going to do about the aging workforce? I mean, we have a lot of people that are getting ready to age out, and we have to make sure that not only can we support those 3,000 new jobs, but we're also supporting the future as Ingalls is bidding on new contracts, Chevron's looking at new growth, and I use those only as examples because I'm familiar with them since I work in Jackson County. So address that. What are we going to do as a state?
Well, it's a complex question. I was hoping John would get that one. But obviously that falls under the Accelerate's purview. Yeah, so having this conversation multiple times, I think there's still a lot we can do just to better communicate opportunity. In terms of the aging workforce, as people are retiring or getting out of the workforce, there are people that are out in our state that want desperately to have a better career, that recognize they might need some additional training, they might need some additional education to get the skill sets that are needed to fill into those positions or fall into those positions. And so obviously our office is focused on how do we take those underemployed or unemployed individuals and get them the short-term training that they need, the skill sets to skill them up to the position where they can take on some of those roles that are becoming vacant in the short term. So we at Accelerate, we have 3 buckets that we really pay attention to. There's what I call workforce triage, customizable training, and then there's horizon thinking. And workforce triage and horizon thinking are where this comes into play. If we have workers who are aging out or opting to retire, we have immediate needs that have to be met. And so we've got to find creative ways to take those individuals who are available now with additional training, whether that's be short-term term or whether that be maybe some longer term approaches, but get them into that position now to start training them up to fill some of those vacancies. The thing that I'm most excited about is that horizon thinking. How do we develop that next generation of workers that want to move into those positions? I was talking with Edmund Hughes. You mentioned Ingalls just a second ago. I was talking with Edmund this morning, and Edmund said we're in it for the long haul. Ingalls is one of those companies, and there are many others that are here represented today, that recognizes to make improvements to their workforce mission, they have to invest in the long haul. That means getting into classrooms earlier and earlier. It used to be that studies would say 7th grade was the magic grade that you would reach young people for career paths. And while that's probably still a very informative time, it's very impressionable for a 13 or 14-year-old to hear about job opportunities, companies are now making their way into elementary school classrooms, telling their story and better communicating opportunities, not so much of, we want you to come and be a welder, you're 9 years old, you should know what that looks like, but what does it mean to be a part of a team? What does it mean to be a part of a company that is high tech? What does success mean? I mean, we've allowed other people to define what success is in our educational system, and teachers every day are trying to explain to students that success is defined not so much by how many degrees you have on your wall, but are you being able to take steps toward the subject matter that you have an interest in, the passion that you have for certain subject matter? Are we providing you opportunities to explore those passion areas of whether it's tactile learning, whether it's CTE, whether it's having those relationships with companies where they might have a field trip or an opportunity to get their hands dirty? So I think in terms of the workforce that's aging out, we've got to do a better job of being creative in how we take some existing workforce, potential workforce, and give them the skills that they need quickly to fill some of that gap. But the horizon thinking, if we get into 4th and 5th grade classrooms and companies are able to invest their time, their energy, and even financial resources to help students understand defining success for them, I think what you're going to see is in the long run, like Edmund Hughes said, in the long run, you're going to see a much more consistent pathway of young people finding their ways into these positions, and these companies are going to continue to grow. And as that horizon thinking grows, that workforce triage begins to shrink. And that's the ideal condition. We want to continue to grow that pipeline and that pathway so that immediate need, that crisis need that we're experiencing right now shrinks over time. So I think it's both of those being dovetailed together, and I think Accelerate's excited to try to help in that endeavor.
And part, if I could add also, part of the answer to that question too is simply automation. You can see it in the metrics that we're looking at with the projects that we're seeing inside of MDA. You're seeing projects with much higher capital investment and fewer jobs associated with those oftentimes. That doesn't matter that that doesn't mean that there aren't jobs associated with that, but you look at, like, whether it's in distribution and logistics with Amazon, or some of your distribution centers that are getting more and more heavily automated. They've got robots that go around and pick up the items, but you've still got to have somebody there on site to keep the plant running, to program those computers and the bots and all the other activities that are affiliated with those types of businesses. So that also requires those higher skills for those people to be able to do that. And along with those higher skills often comes higher wages. So I think you will see automation partly answering the question of how is the aging workforce going to be addressed in the future.
So John, let me follow up to that question. You were talking about your partnerships that you're building with the universities. I see Dr. Julie Jordan from Mississippi State in the audience, and I see a couple other folks, I believe. But talk to us about, you were talking about the automation piece, and you spoke to the technology transfer piece. But what's the partnership with the university to try to address some of the workforce issues as well, particularly when you're talking about automation and making sure that we have the workforce prepared? Because I know you've got some unique partnerships with the universities there. So speak to some of that.
Well, I think the big part of that question, the answer to that question, is more on the pipeline. get those students interested, just like Ryan was talking about earlier, get those students interested in those technology-related jobs. But we're looking at, I guess on the MDA side, the outputs of that. So what we're doing, we're on every other week, we have a ongoing meeting with folks like Dr. Jordan and her counterparts at the other institutions. And you have bulldogs and rebels getting along. And we have, it's just a great opportunity, a great venue for us to not only find out what's going on inside the campus, but we're able to glean that type of information, and we put that into our marketing portfolios so that we know what's going on at the research institutions and can use that sometimes in our sales pitches. It also creates opportunities, for example, like this. Our energy division and entrepreneurship center inside the agency has been working with this group of technology transfer offices and the research professionals. We secured a grant from the Department of Energy. We call it VQuad, and it's providing $50,000 grants for concepts being developed inside the university for folks to build a business from. So, and there are lots of little nuggets like that we can take advantage of, but it's just making the decision to do it and then having the partnerships and the infrastructure set up with those institutions to get it out and make something of it. So the VQuad we just selected our first round of grant recipients, so it'll be interesting to see what ideas come out of that, using technology that's from Mississippi to create Mississippi businesses. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out when we get to the end of this program, and hopefully keep it going.
So let's shift over to market trends. You mentioned earlier in your comments that 80% of the growth in Mississippi from last year was existing industry. So this is a question for John, for you, Janita. I really would like to understand and walk through the market trends. What are you seeing with existing industry? Are we seeing changes in product lines with our existing industry? And then when your teams are out recruiting, I mean, that's part of the function of MDA, is to try to recruit new business and industry to Mississippi. What market trends are we starting to see as we come out of a post-COVID environment?
Big question. And it's not fair to just simply say, well, it's all across the board. We are focused on our, what we're good at. And we've mentioned, or at least I've mentioned several times, about telling our story. Telling the story means telling what you're good at. So our bread and butter amongst our industry sectors are things like advanced manufacturing, aerospace, defense, agribusiness, distribution and logistics, chemicals, forestry, energy. And then we've got aspirational sectors, information technology, recruiting more corporate headquarters back to Mississippi, mobile communications, things of that nature. So those are kind of our aspirational sectors. But I almost can't help going back to saying it's all across the board. If we continue to see strong growth in all our existing core sectors, distribution and logistics, great. If you look at the forestry industry, I get so excited about what we've done, what we've seen across Mississippi so far over the last 12 months in new sawmills that are coming online in the state. I go back to us all getting excited about these big mega projects that land in an urban center and it creates thousands of jobs, and that's great. But at the same time, we've got to be focused on these rural areas, and that's why forestry and sawmills are so great. We've got the feedstock out there. We've got plenty of it. Those are great paying jobs. With these sawmills, and we've done, I think, 5 in the last 7 months. So we've got more in the pipeline that will be announced throughout the summer. But those are paying $45,000 a year on average. They're $150 million investments, and they're buying, of course, the feedstock from a 60-mile radius of that sawmill. So those are dollars going to landowners that get churned over when those landowners take that dollar and go buy tractors and buy new houses and clothes. So you see a lot of churn of that dollar. with projects like these sawmill projects in more rural communities. Another interesting thing about these sawmills is once you land the sawmill, with the increased focus on renewable energy, particularly in the European market with wood pellets, well, we announce a sawmill. The very next day, we've got 2 or 3 wood pellet operators that are knocking on the door saying, we want to meet these guys. See, it's a snowball effect. So, at the same time, I'll just say that with trends, I guess end by saying all our existing core sectors seem to be doing really well and growing. I can get more specific if you had a more specific question.
Well, and I think, and I'll speak to Jackson County, over the last 18 months, we've seen consumer goods increase. Amazon, being able to deliver everything to your doorstep. And so you think about that, what is Mississippi's position in the consumer good market? And it's really the chemical piece of it, because that's what we're doing. We've got the chemical opportunities to then send over to, the Asian markets to create those consumer goods. So talk to us a little bit about those type projects that you're currently seeing.
Well, I hesitate to get too detailed, but yeah, chemicals along the Gulf Coast, big. Distribution and logistics in Northwest Mississippi. Automotive sectors is really strong for us. We've seen a huge amount of activity in the electric vehicle battery manufacturer space. And you'll see trends in the automotive industry as, I'm kind of a skeptic. A few years ago when we were talking about electric vehicles, I'm like, yeah, right. I'm not going to be buying an electric truck anytime in my lifetime. But what we've seen, what happens, in the last couple of years, it's happened, past tense almost. That doesn't mean we're going to stop making combustion engines that fuel these cars or make the cars go, but you will see conversions of eventually all these manufacturing plants across the Southeast as they convert over to electric, and like the sawmills and the wood pellets. Once you got the conversion of the plant, at the same time that's going on, you've got to have the battery manufacturers coming online so that they can supply those automotive plants. So it's unique to see all these different things happening at the same time.
Janita, from a small business perspective, what are you seeing with market trends?
So, Mary Martha, what we're seeing basically is just a substantial increase in the use of digital technology. Entrepreneurs are having to depend more on technology now more than ever. They're getting trained via, the technology platforms. They're being counseled, that way as well versus in person so much. And of course, they themselves, these small businesses and the moms and pops are sometimes basically having to allow their employees to work remotely. So with the, increased use of technology, of course, comes more transparency. And the areas of our rural state that are deficient in digital technology, that of course continues to be challenged. And, employees' safety, what we're seeing, that's more of a priority these days to make sure that employees can work safely no matter where. It's been, challenging, basic ideas of, in terms of coming into an office, that sort of has changed. The possibilities of working from home or from an alternate work site or conduct your business elsewhere, and then, just sort of trying to balance work-life issues, that really matters to small businesses, and whether travel is absolutely necessary or not. And so, the increase of digital shopping is something else that's happening. You mentioned Amazon just a minute ago. That's changed marketing strategies, and competition amongst brands has increased with access to more products and services for everybody. And one trend that we're seeing, I guess you'll call it a trend, is that in spite of COVID, businesses are starting up. They're seeking loan assistance from SBA's non-COVID related programs as well. For example, our 7A guarantee loan program, our 504, again, in spite of COVID. And we have some statistics in terms of our lending for those programs nationally this fiscal year versus last fiscal year, we're really on pace to do just about what we did last fiscal year in terms of numbers and dollars under our regular loan programs. Also wanted to tag on something you mentioned about the workforce development and the aging workforce. So, of course, the SBA is willing to work with whoever decides that they want to, try to start a business. And of course, our resource partners will assist as well. But years ago, SBA was involved in an initiative called Encore Entrepreneurship. And this was for the 50+ group who had a career, they retired, they got bored, and then they wanted to do something else. And many of them had some sort of hobby that they turned into an actual business. So there was outreach going on all over the place. We work with AARP in terms of our Encore Entrepreneurship Initiative. And so that's another, another option is that although, the workforce may be aging and there may be a need to increase, get employees in other businesses or larger businesses, starting a business is an option too for many. And so we want that to be on the table for consideration as well.
So Janita, let's talk about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. This last round of ARP funds that were recently released include the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. As we all know, Mississippi restaurants are important to our quality of place. Can you provide more details about the fund? I'm assuming that funds are still available, and if so, what is the process for applying?
Okay, thank you. RRF, which was authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act, that's one of several pandemic relief programs of assistance offered by the SBA. And this program is designed to, like you mentioned, help restaurants and other eligible businesses really keep their doors open. RRF will provide restaurants and funding equal to the pandemic-related revenue of up to $10 million per location, per business rather, and no more than $5 million per physical location. And so recipients are not required to repay the funding as long as the funds are used for eligible uses no later than, they got a little time, March the 11th, 2021. So this particular program was built from the ground up based on the statute, and it was met with overwhelming interest, which really was not a big surprise at all. The application portal is now closed, unfortunately. I believe, it's scheduled to close May 31st, but, closed a little earlier. I think it was around May 24th, and that's because funding ran out. And in the first 2 weeks of opening, SBA received more than 300,000 applications, representing more than $72 billion in requested funds. So, understand that the federal funding appropriated for RRF was $28.6 billion. So the amount of requested funds just for the first 2 weeks, the 300,000 applications, was $72 billion. So that's about 2.5 times the funding. So the statute required a 21-day priority period for small businesses owned and controlled by women, veterans, and socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And so the SBA processed and awarded priority applicants as was mandated by Congress and consistent with the intent of the law. Now, this is in the public domain, so, concerning the 21-day priority period, 3 lawsuits were filed challenging that. There was 1 filed in the Eastern District of Tennessee and 2 in the Northern District of Texas. And these lawsuits have led to 3 adverse court rulings against SBA. After the expiration of the priority period, in light of the court rulings, SBA began the process of, doing applications in the order received, without regard to the priority status. So now, with respect to the lawsuit, this means that due to the legal conclusion, the SBA is really precluded from paying certain priority applicants. There was just about 3,000 of them that received notice of award from SBA. And although, the approval notices went out to those applicants, SBA has not issued payments to them because we cannot do so based upon the court decision. Now, at the end of last week, the U.S. Department of Justice did respond to the lawsuit, so it is ongoing litigation. And I do want to share that, however, despite the litigation, we have successfully funded more than 100,000 restaurants for a total of $27.4 billion in relief funds. And with the 300,000 applicants that that we received within the first couple of weeks from the portal opening, for the $72 billion, which equated to that amount of requested funding versus the $28.6 billion appropriated, it's quite obvious that this hard-hit industry remains in need of additional help. And so on this past Monday, we were informed that there are bipartisan bills in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate to appropriate more funding for RRF. So, just stay tuned for that. So, but, in the meantime, there are additional economic relief programs available through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or EIDL, where our administrator, Isabella Guzman, increased the threshold from $150,000 up to $500,000. That's that low interest rate long-term loan that small businesses and eligible nonprofits can get. Also, there's something called Targeted EIDL Advance, which is at $10,000 of grant funding that does not have to be paid back, in addition to something called Supplemental Targeted EIDL Advance, which is another $5,000 that may be available. So, that's what's available now for more information on this, or for businesses that are affected and have not received the funding that they should have gotten for RRF, they can go to SBA.gov for further updates.
Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to give everyone an opportunity to make some closing remarks. However, John and Ryan, I know you're going to be surprised about this, but I do want you to address one question. There are a lot of people in this room that have been excited about the fact that we're now going to try to integrate economic development and workforce development and make this process much more streamlined. This has been something that we've talked about as a state for some time now. So as you make your closing remarks, if you can address this question: how is Accelerate Mississippi and Mississippi Development Authority going to work together to streamline our workforce development programs? And do you have any innovative programs that you intend to implement? So I'll start with you, John.
Well, this is going to sound very generic, and I don't mean for it to, but the answer to that question is teamwork. But I think Ryan will back me up here. It is an integrated team. And I would say, I see Jackie Turner here with some of her staff. Employment security is a part of that mix as well. Over the last 12 months at MDA, we've been focused on retooling, getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. So we've brought in some excellent leadership. We've got experienced, a new chief economic development officer who used to be in the field. We hadn't had somebody that came from the local community in quite a while, who's actually been boots on the ground. So we've got that experienced leadership heading up our recruiting team. We've got a great recruiting staff. We've been focused on beefing up our research, because, and that goes into telling our story better. And I'll share this as an example. We've met with dozens of consul generals, ambassadors, representatives from foreign countries, as we've been focused on expanding and strategizing on how do we do a better job of global recruiting. And we've heard over and over, we just don't know anything about Mississippi. We don't know you. Well, that's a little disheartening, but that's going to change. But that's why the research piece is so important. We can't position ourselves to compete by saying, hey, Mississippi's great, come here. You need facts, you need evidence. We've got to identify our competitive advantages, things like logistics and skills in our community college system and our workforce system. And we've got to get details out to those employers and site consultants so that we can make a strong argument for why you do need to be in Mississippi. And our research group, we've got 2 PhDs now that are involved in research. One's a bona fide MIT PhD, and he's, I call him the smartest guy in the building. Ask him a question, he knows something about it. But they are literally, their job is to research data and pull out those golden nuggets that we can then plug in to help better tell our story. And one example of those is we've identified that of 9 different NAICS codes within advanced manufacturing, Mississippi has led the country in job growth for the last 2 years. Who'd have thought that? So it's digging out those types of nuggets and then being able to tell that story. And then Ryan and Accelerate play a role with us. Once we've got the evidence, the facts, we've got the recruiting, all that system is running well, then we can have Ryan and his new team in to help sell the workforce side of that, because that obviously, you know, workforce is always going to come up when you've got that site visit with an employer, with a site consultant, on how are we going to meet the employment needs for what they're planning to or proposing to bring to Mississippi. So I would just say we view ourselves as an integrated team. Ryan's at our office at least twice a week. He sits in on our, you know, I'm real big on, you know, we sign non-disclosure agreements with everybody we work with, of course, but we do have, I'm not one of these people that says this is our sandbox and we're going to keep our secrets and you can't play. But Ryan's at the table because that's, I view that as, I view him as part of our team at MDA, and he views us the same way. We're working in partnership together. We've got workforce assets inside the building at MDA, but our culture needs to be, we're not in charge of workforce. Ryan's in charge of workforce. We're going to follow his lead. So we are working as a team in that effect.
So Ryan, if there's anything that you can add to this, I mean, you've got it's exciting job. It's a big job. I mean, workforce delivery system and streamlining what we're doing and working with all the partners is a big task. So is there anything that you could add to what John's saying about your plans as you ramp up Accelerate Mississippi? And you have about 2 minutes left.
Okay, great. Closing arguments in 2 minutes.
You should be good at that.
May it please the court. Yeah, so I will say, dovetailing on that, and I'll give my thanks to Jackie Turner and her staff guy. Lord, thank you so much. And I know Sandy Christ is here from the Community College Board. It's being organized. So John's talking about getting the data, getting the statistical information, getting the evidence that we need to tell our story. My job is to try to organize us in a way that we can leverage the assets that we have. I am the new guy. I've got to learn what your needs are. I come from a manufacturing background, so I know Lex Lemmers, and I know what Packard does, and I know what their struggles are, because I've been there. We have to be better organized so that our office can understand what your business needs might be, what your workforce needs are, because they're different than Packard. If you're a small business, if you're a mom and pop shop, if you're an IT-based company, if you're in hospitality management, I met with some of the Beau Rivage people the last couple of days. There are different needs. We need to hear what those needs might be, and we got to be organized. So in the last minute and maybe 30 seconds that I have, what we're going to be doing with Accelerate is pushing what I call our ecosystem approach. There are roughly 8, from my opinion, 8 ecosystems in the state of Mississippi that you will see resources prominently placed. Again, I'll mention them: K through 12, community colleges, economic developers, policy and lawmakers in those areas, not-for-profit organizations that have a vested interest in seeing the workforce needle move, but most importantly, industry and business members. My job is to organize those ecosystems so that when I get the evidence and statistical information from John and his staff, and we walk into a room, whether it's to a company who's expanding or a new company that's interested in Mississippi, not only do we look organized, but we are. And we're focusing all of our efforts through that single lens, that when that company walks out of that room, they will have a single unified message, and they're going to know that we can back that up. That's my job. I'm excited about it, and I look forward to getting to work with y'all.
Thank you, Ron. Janita, if you have any closing comments.
Yeah, I want to throw a pitch for a new initiative that SBA has just rolled out called Community Navigators. It's really a $100 million investment fund that was created by the American Rescue Plan Act. And it's really for SBA traditional resource partners, in addition to state agencies, tribes, various units of local government, cities, et cetera, and other nonprofit organizations, including chambers of commerce, to apply to become a community navigator. And it's actually being done through grants.gov, The portal has opened. It closes July the 12th. Again, this is a $100 million fund. Awards will be made in the range of $1 million to $5 million for a 2-year period. And it's really for these community navigators to try to better link small businesses and underserved markets and moms and pops with various resources within the SBA and otherwise. So I wanted to kind of, throw that out there to kind of whet your appetite, because I'm sure there are economic developers in the room and, city governments, et cetera. So just kind of look at that, go to sba.gov/community navigators. That's one way to get to it, to find out more information about that. So I want to throw a pitch out for that. And thank you for letting me participate.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. I think we've all been given a good perspective of how we're going to move forward as we come out of a post-COVID environment and how Mississippi remains competitive. So thank you.